Professor Wergeles here. We are working our way through the controller. There's a lot of code here. You'll want to go over this for the challenge. That way you know what's going on in the program. We've implemented the initialize method. We are now moving down. You'll see I have a select visualizers method. So if they click on the menu item, select visualizers will get called. I'm going to pass the event. You'll see in select visualizer, I'm going to see which element they clicked. I'm going to get the user data, which will have the visualizer stored in it. That's why I called set user data here. So every menu item I call set user data with the visualizer. So when they click on that, I can get the user data and pull the visualizer back out. And then I'm going to call change visualizer. So I'm going to call the change visualizer method. So you'll see that all the functionality here is separated out into functions. I don't write all the code here and have to write it twice. It's separated out into functions so you know what's happening. When you see select visualizer here, just by reading the function name, you know what's happening. It's going to select the visualizer. And here it says change visualizer. So without writing any comments in the code, this code should be clear, and you can see this method is going to change the visualizer. So we can go to change visualizer. Change visualizer will see if the current visualizer is not equal to null. So if a visualizer is already selected, I need to call the end method. I want to remove all of the previous objects off of the display so I can show the new visualizer. So I'll set the visualizer they selected as the current visualizer, and then I'm going to say current visualizer.start. So I'm going to pass in the number of bands and the viz pane, and the start method should now set up all the objects on the display like we looked at earlier. And I'm going to set the text. So I'm going to set the text on the display to let the user know which visualizer is currently playing. If I come up here, you'll see select number of bands. That's going to get called if they select this menu item. So if they select the menu item, you'll see I set the user data with the bands value. So as they're looping through the integer array, the bands will be 1, 2, 4, 8. So as I'm going to set the user data 1, 2, 4, 8. So when they select the number of bands, I can see which one they selected, grab the integer back out from the user data. You'll see if the current visualizer is not equal to null, then I'm going to call visualizer.start. Remember, the start method also called the end method. So if I change the number of bands, it shouldn't crash the program because I'm going to remove the old visualizer, put the new one on with the new number of bands, and you'll see if the media player is not null, so if it's playing, I need to reset up the audio spectrum listener. So I'm going to set up the number of bands. That way, the audio spectrum listener will now add more values to the array. Remember, it had the magnitudes and phases, which was a float array. So when I change the number of bands, I should now get more magnitude values. And I should have the phases array also increase in length. And I'm going to go ahead and set the band text on the display so the user knows how many bands have been selected. If I keep going down, you'll see I have open media. This is a very important method. Open media will take a file. It's going to clear the previous path and errors. You'll see if the media player is not equal to null, I'm going to dispose the media player. So I'm going to remove the media player, and you can always look at the Java docs if you don't know what this method is doing. So if I right click and do a show Java doc, it may take some time to open up. Here comes the Java docs, and you'll see dispose freeze all resources associated with the player. So it's not only going to stop the player, but it's going to remove all the resources associated with that player. So for example, the audio spectrum listener is associated with the media player. So I'm going to remove the previous audio spectrum listener, and I'm going to set up a new one. So just like in our media play example, I'm going to grab the file. I need the URL or the URI. Here's the path. So the path will be the URI. I'm going to take that to a string. So in our example, we saw it could be a URL to a server, or it could be a local path, which is a URI on the local machine. And then I'm going to create a new media player with the media passed in as a parameter. I'm going to set the media player on the media view. So if you want to play some videos, you can. You'll see I have some event listeners. So when the media player is ready, this method will get called. And when the media player is at the end of the media, this method will get called. And you'll notice some familiar methods back in our previous example. You'll see set number of bands is here with the number of bands specified, and also set the audio spectrum interval with the interval provided. And I need to uncomment these 3 lines of code here, which is going to be setting the audio spectrum listener. Now this is the most important part because this is where our data is coming from. So as the audio file is playing, the listener is going to be listening to the audio file, and as the decibels and different values from the audio file are being updated, the listener will catch that and pass that in magnitudes and phases. And you'll see I have a handle update method. We'll look at that here soon. You'll see I set autoplay equal to true, so the file should play automatically as soon as the open media method is called. And then you'll see I set the text, so I let the user know what file is being played. Let's look at handle update. Handle update will get the current time, change that to milliseconds. I'm going to set the text on the display. I'm also going to set the value on the slider, so the slider will move, and I'm going to call the current visualizer's update method. Now this is where your visualizer will come into play. So that update method is being called, and then it should update the user interface and update all the objects on the display. After uncommenting these 3 lines of code, the program should now work. So we should have a basic understanding of what's happening in the program for us to be able to add our own visualizer. So if we run the program, this will pop up. You'll see I have my menu bar up at the top. I can click on File, select Open. A file chooser will appear. I can now search for an MP3 file. Okay, here's some MP3 files from the previous lecture. You can use those as examples. When I select it, you'll see the visualizer appear. If I select play, you should see the visualizer start to update. You'll see the text is set up here for which file you're playing. Here's the length of the audio file and the current time in milliseconds. Here's the number of bands. So I have 40 ellipses, and as the audio frequencies are coming in, radius Y is being increased based off of the frequencies. You see this is a really good song. You can see all the action happening as the song's playing. Now at this time, the update frequency is at 0.05, which is pretty precise, but you can always increase that value if you see it necessary. Now, I can change the part of the song on the slider. Do you see the slider works? I can change the number of bands. So here's 140 ellipses. You'll see the high frequencies are not being activated as much. I talked about how to fix that in the previous video. I should be able to change visualizers. So here's visualizer number 2. So you'll see even though these frequencies aren't being activated as much, this visualizer is able to handle and still have some action going on over here. If I change to visualizer 3, you'll see it also updates the background color. Change the number of bands. It should not crash the program, so make sure you're checking this. Okay, make sure you check that for your program. Make sure all the buttons work, changing visualizers, changing bands. It should not crash your program. You should be able to change the slider. I should be able to open up different media files, not just one. So if I select another media file, you'll see the slider goes back to 0. Click play. You should see some action from the visualizers. Okay, you'll see I'm updating all these values and the program's not crashing. And you'll see it also removes the previous visualizer. So if I click 8 and then I click 20, there's not 28 ellipses there, there's only 20. So it removed all the previous ellipses. Make sure that happens with your program. Okay, we still have some more methods to go through in the controller before we create our own visualizer. Stick with Professor Wergeles, and we'll see you in the next video.